Another part of suffering that the Buddha said was suffering was not getting what you want. Now, all of us, if you think about things we want, we all have our list. I want an SUV. I want a nice house. I want, and most of us, when we think of what we want, it is wrapped around material things. For most people, I think it is. If not, the consumers have it wrong. If you get a new iPhone 4, you think that iPhone 4 is going to make you happy, and it may for a minute until it don't work the next day, or 6 months from now you're sitting there with the iPhone 4, and all of a sudden 6 months from now the iPhone 5 comes out. All of a sudden the iPhone 4 is not any good anymore. So sometimes not getting what you want is suffering. If you want that item and you don't get it, automatically your mind starts messing with you. But at the same time, getting what you do not want is another form of suffering. Sickness is a perfect example of this. No one wants to get sick. But if you get sick, that puts you into suffering. Life itself, folks, is suffering. But now, if we look, there's 3 types of suffering. The first one is suffering of suffering, or they call it dukkha. When you look at this, examples of suffering relates to the reaction when things around us change in opposition to our desire. The number one example of this is hunger. Hunger, thirst, sickness, painful things by nature, or it can be an argument with a family member. Things around us that change in opposition to our desire. Hunger, we have that hunger rising up in us. We go get something to eat, and all of a sudden that hunger is satisfied for about an hour, depending on what you want. Then all of a sudden your body's experiencing hunger again. So really, the food itself didn't satisfy your hunger because your hunger came back. That in itself is a form of suffering. Sickness, thirst. If you're real thirsty and you go get something to drink, that'll quench your thirst for a minute. Then all of a sudden the feeling of thirst comes back to you. It's not being able to completely satisfy whatever it is within you that creates the suffering. You got that look about you, buddy? Okay.
Just listening.
Okay. Any questions on suffering of suffering? No? Okay. Suffering of change. Now this is something that's harder to locate because it relates to our reactions to things in opposition to our desires, relationships. Relationships grow apart. Your favorite clothing wears out. It's related to a sense of instability and unreliability. A sense of what goes up must come down. It's kind of like the boomerang effect of suffering. If you throw a boomerang out, it's going to come back to you. But if you better be prepared, because it'll knock your head off if you don't know what's coming. It's kind of the same thing with this. It's suffering of change. We have everything we've ever wanted in life, but there's still suffering attached to it because you know that eventually it's going to end. Your happiness, you're really happy right now, but you know deep in the back of your mind that suffering's going to, that happiness is going to end, and it's going to bring you to suffering. You get a new relationship, you find the perfect boyfriend or the perfect girlfriend, and it's real good for about the first couple months, and all of a sudden it starts changing. You know in the end it's going to change because, is it because they changed, or was it because you changed? Which do you think?
Both.
They didn't change. Your mental perception of them changed. You meet somebody, you meet this guy, and boy, he's better than sliced bread. I tell you what, we finished each other's sentences, man, it's a beautiful thing. I don't take him home to meet my mama. Right? Take a snapshot 3 months later. Well, he's okay. Yeah, he makes me happy. 6 months later. Okay. Yeah. 9 months later. You know what? I just don't think that, no. I don't know. Is it the person that changed? Or is it your mental perception of the person that changed? Chances are it started here. Because they didn't change, your perception of them changed. It's like someone at work. A prime example, irritating people. Anybody here does not have an irritating person in their life? No? You don't have an irritating person in your life?
No, I do. I have.
Oh, okay. Wow, well, that's it.
Almost everyone.
No, I've said
Okay.
neighbors count, right?
Yes.
Neighbors count. So let me ask you something. How do you get rid of an irritating person? Do you yell back at them? If they're yelling at you, you're this, you're that, you're this, and you're going right back at them nose to nose, is that how you get rid of that irritating person?
You ignore them if the best you can.
Mm-hmm. You ignore them the best you can. Why? Because what you send out comes back to you. You got an irritating person in your life, you probably are not going to like this answer. The only reason you got an irritating person in your life is because at one time you were irritating to someone else. You reap what you sow. I think it was Jesus that said that. Wow, a Christian. All right. Well, my root would say our homie. Jesus, our homie. You reap what you sow. So if you have an irritating person in your life, the only way to get an irritating person is to have at one time been irritating. You got that look about you again. Okay? He's sitting there going, was I ever? Okay? And we think that, okay, if we yell at the irritating person, they'll leave us alone. Maybe not. Maybe if you don't talk to them at all of a sudden they think you're Mr. Goody Two-Shoes and don't talk back. Next thing you know, they heighten their level some more. But the way you get rid of an irritating person is not to be irritating back. Now, karma is not instant. They're not going to just poof and they disappear. But you're automatically planting a seed that in the future, you're not going to have an irritating person in your life. Now, we're not going to get into it today, but there's a teaching that the Buddha did that's real deep on irritating people and how to get rid of them and how to plant a seed for the future. We're going to get in hopefully the group will last long enough to get into that because that's a really good teaching. So what you send out comes back to you. Okay? Now, let's look at that in a way of your favorite clothing. How's the only way that you can get clothing is at one time you helped someone else get clothing? We're tapping into the law of karma because the law of karma has a lot to do with the First Noble Truth. Birth, the reason you've taken the birth that you've taken is because you've created the karma to get the birth that you've got. That's why at some point I said at some point in your past you must have done some wonderful things to have the life you have right now. Because it's almost impossible to have a human life. And you've got it. I mean, you guys are cat's meow. Okay, you've got something that every other animal on the planet would love to have. You have an opportunity to hear something like this. You have an opportunity to hear Dharma, to hear about the life of the Buddha, to hear about ways to make your life better that no dog will ever understand. No roach, no ant, no insect will never understand. You have the intellect to understand it. That makes you far above any realm of any other being. You ever thought of it like that, though? Most people don't. They don't see themselves as, wow, I must be awfully lucky. I must have done something awfully good to be where I am today. And that's how you need to start looking at your life. You need to start looking at your existence that way. You need to start looking at the things around you and start being thankful for everything you have when there are so many out there that don't have.